Why is it that so many Americans are moving to Mexico these days? Especially when you start to factor in that Mexico is starting to get just as expensive to live in as the USA in some aspects. Hey guys, how's it going, and welcome back to another episode. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the real reasons Americans are moving out here to Mexico. The reality is that one of Mexico's biggest selling points for decades has been the low cost of living. But in recent years, there has been tons of other factors which are contributing to the mass migration these days. As the US dollar keeps losing value and the Mexican economy and peso have gotten stronger, cost of living and affordability are less and less a viable reason for many to choose Mexico over other options. So the question is asked, why are so many people still moving to Mexico despite the fact that it is now getting just as expensive as the USA? Why move to Mexico if there are still places in the USA that are relatively inexpensive when compared to some cities in Mexico such as Guadalajara, Mérida, and Mexico City, to just name a few? So, what gives? Why are so many people still flocking to Mexico even though they know fully well that there are less expensive options in the USA? Also knowing that Mexico is only expected to get even more expensive in the years to come. Well, as the old saying goes, it's not all about the money. The reality is that Mexico is still a great and affordable option for many that want to live a more humble and frugal lifestyle. For those who still want to live as most Mexicans do, then Mexico is a great option. But if you're one of the many who still wants to live the typical American lifestyle, then you will find out very quickly how expensive Mexico can be. Cost of living aside, again, why is it that so many people are still choosing to live in Mexico instead of staying in the USA? Why go through the trouble of learning a new language and culture to just save a few bucks? Is it even worth it anymore? Well, for many out there in the audience, it is still definitely worth it. Again, as another old saying goes, there are just some things money can't buy. Which is something that is very true about life in Mexico. People always like to point out there is a higher quality of life out here in Mexico and that there is more freedom. But what exactly does that mean? There are some people that still argue you have much more freedom and can live a higher quality of life in the United States. Many argue that it is much safer in the USA over most countries in the world, especially Mexico. Some even stick to their guns, pun intended, and say that the US has better access to healthcare, better quality of food, and even better infrastructure and public transportation system. So again, the question is asked, why even move to Mexico to begin with if the USA is so great? The reality is that you can still find places in the USA where you can buy homes for pennies on the dollar. There are plenty of rural towns in the USA where you can still live out the American dream. In fact, there are many places in the United States where one can call home and live an amazing life you always dreamed of. So again, why is Mexico so great? Well, the reality is that for many Americans, life in the USA is not that great anymore, and it hasn't been for some time now. In fact, many are starting to realize that there are better options for them out there, and Mexico is one of them. Sure, you can move to a small town in the USA or even buy a house in Detroit or other struggling cities for a few dollars. So why don't more people do that? Well, first off, the main reason many people don't buy extremely dirt cheap homes in major US city is simply because of how dangerous those neighborhoods in which those homes are located in are. Yes, even more dangerous in many parts of Mexico. They are also in food deserts, meaning, it is hard to find grocery stores or any kind of area, within, walking distance or driving distance in which you can actually buy food. There is also still a very high cost of living associated with living in a major city, even if you're living in a place that, you're probably paying zero rent or very little rent to begin with. Plus, there is a litany of other reasons as to why, many people don't want to live in Detroit or Cleveland or, again, name a city in which, is dilapidated at this point right now in the USA. Okay, since living in a city is not a viable option for many, well, how about buying or renting a home in a rural town in the USA instead? Well, in the United States, living in a small town in the middle of nowhere comes with its set of challenges, such as no doctors or hospitals or pharmacies nearby, no real market to buy real food, again, living in a food desert. There is just a bunch of dollar stores, convenience stores, and gas stations from where you can choose to buy your food from. Again, not a real good option for many people out there. There's also no real transit system to move you around town or even to another nearby city or town. In fact, many times the infrastructure is also lacking, which will make it extremely difficult for you to connect to the grid for water, power, and internet. Plus, if you try to create your own energy, such as get some solar panels or some wind energy, or you try to dig a well, you might get in trouble with the local authorities. Also, many areas out there resemble more of a ghost town than an actual bustling city or livable place that you can actually call home. There is also no real community or future outlook for many of these areas. There is also no real jobs to be had either, plus a bunch of other reasons. And because of these reasons, unfortunately, there are not many people moving into these small towns. In fact, most people these days are actually moving out of these towns and these areas, and they're deserting many of these areas even more. These are just some of the concerns that many people have about living in a small town in the USA these days. So even though it might seem like a good option at first, when you look deeper into it, it's really not that good of a choice. Again, I'm not going to say that there aren't good options out there and that there aren't good towns that have, good jobs and a good situation. Same as, there's certain areas where you can still buy a cheap home and you can really take full advantage of the situation. But the reality is that it's not as easy as, a lot of people think it is. And that is why a lot of people are looking into moving to Mexico or, just leaving the country altogether. It doesn't have to be moving to Mexico per se, but just leaving the country. On the flip side, Mexico is on the opposite side of the spectrum. For example, you can live in a small, thriving city such as Merida, Yucatan, where I live, for about the same cost as living in a small town in the middle of nowhere, USA. Plus, if you actually do decide on living in a more rural area of Mexico, such as a small town or village, you don't have to worry about not having access to healthcare or a pharmacy or any other kind of services that you might be needing. When it comes to food and household items, you will have many options to choose from in a small town where many businesses are actually bustling and thriving on a daily basis. There is also going to be an abundance of markets in every area where you can get fresh eggs, meat, fruits, vegetables, and all kinds of things that are grown and harvested locally. Small hardware stores, tailors, mechanics, and so much more. Again, just like a real small town used to be in the USA. Another benefit is that you can also get around town on a bicycle or a small motorized vehicle of your choice, or even a horse, without the worry of the local police harassing you for not having the proper paperwork or a license or whatever. Many times, there will also be a small transportation hub that will allow you to get from point A to point B in town for just a few pesos. Plus, a bus or a train system that runs every day that can also get you from town to town or even bring you to the nearest big city. You also have access to the grid by either building your own power supply, again, whether you want to do some solar panels or some wind power or whatever you want to do, or you want to build a well, or you want to simply just, connect to the already existing infrastructure. You got all the options available at your disposal. All towns and villages in Mexico are bustling communities with a thriving economy that in many cases are not connected to anything like the state system and thus not reliant on other outside factors such as, a state or federal government. They are sovereign on their own. They can function on their own. No matter what happens, if you're in your small town and you have a thriving small town, with a large ecosystem where, basically you have all your needs met in that town, it doesn't matter what happens outside of the town, you're going to be fine. Everything's going to be all enclosed within that area. Of course, during normal times, you'll be able to trade and, again, navigate between different towns and different areas. But again, just like we saw during the pandemic, sometimes, you can't really move around too much. And in that case, well, if you're in a small town out here in Mexico, you really got nothing to worry about because, well, all your needs are going to be met within that area. Also, the closer you are to a city, the more access to things you will have. And if you live in a small city like Mérida, Yucatan, where I live, well, you're going to find that you're going to have just about anything at your fingertips, even if it means getting it through such a service as Amazon. In fact, you might come to realize that you might have access to more things living out here in a big city in Mexico than you ever did back home in the USA. These are just some of the examples of the benefits of living in Mexico and why many people are choosing to make this amazing country their new home. But as we're going to discuss further in this video, there are many, many reasons as to why people are actually moving out here that don't include just, again, cost of living. In fact, perhaps you can leave down below in the comments section, what you think. What are your reasons for moving to Mexico, and what are your reasons as to why you love it out here so much, whether you live here or you're going to move out here? What are the reasons in which you are moving out here to Mexico? What is it that makes Mexico so great for you, even if it is to just save a few bucks? And so with that said, as I said many times before, if you're just looking to save a few bucks and are only looking into Mexico in order to save money and have a lower cost of living, then perhaps this country is not for you. Because as you're going to find out eventually, is that, well, that's not the right reason to move to any country. You can always find a way to save a few bucks wherever you're at, or at the very least, if you're going to move, find a place that you're going to actually want to move to. Again, if you're looking to immerse yourself in a completely new culture and surround yourself with some of the friendliest people you will ever meet, then you will love Mexico. Living in Mexico is more than just saving a few bucks. It is a completely different dynamic to what you might be used to where you come from. And if you don't embrace it, you will quickly hate it out here. Assimilating to Mexico is more than just learning some Spanish. There are many cultural differences you will have to get used to. For some of you out there, it will be extremely easy to assimilate, and for others, they might not ever be able to assimilate at all. One of the reasons there is much higher quality of life out here in Mexico is because of the family-oriented and more conservative lifestyle that most Mexicans tend to live. A lot of it has to do with the country being very religious. Around 80% of the total population of Mexico, which is around 100 million Mexicans, identify as Roman Catholic, making it the second largest Catholic country in the world, only behind Brazil. Since most Mexicans are religious in some fashion, it creates a strong foundation from which to build on. Many Mexicans put a large emphasis on things such as family values, a strong work ethic, and always trying to do the right thing. Most are extremely community-oriented and care a lot about their neighborhoods and their neighbors, not just friends and family. In fact, many Mexicans will go out of their way to help out any Samaritan in need. Many try to put their differences aside and find an amicable solution to just about any problem. They also tend not to rely so much on government and instead take it upon themselves to fix whatever problem the community has by themselves. It can be as simple as gathering a few neighbors to pitch in to fill in some potholes on the street, or to organize a charity event to help people in the community who are in need. But again, most Mexicans are self-sufficient and try to do their best to make sure that they are not a burden to others. And in the case in which there are people with limited abilities, they do everything they can to give them that extra push and help that they need in order to be self-sufficient, to help empower them instead of creating dependency. Most Mexicans tend to rely on themselves and their community and not so much on any kind of government or authority to come and save the day. Because of this, Mexicans have a lot more freedom to live their lives. Since there is not as much government oversight or enforcement of rules, laws, and regulations, many Mexicans have to figure out a way to live together in peace and harmony. Most practice a philosophy of live and let live, which comes with its negative and positive aspects. Many people still think Mexico is a third world country simply because so much of the population lives in true anarchy, which by definition, the word anarchy simply means without rulers. Most people govern themselves, especially in smaller, more rural communities. Something a typical American these days can't even imagine living in. A society where the people think for themselves and decide what is right and wrong, and it is not decided by a bunch of politicians or enforcement agents to force the implementation of a bunch of arbitrary rules and regulations. Most Mexicans are forced to resolve their issues by themselves, and if you plan on moving and living in Mexico, you should be aware that you are no exception to that rule. Besides the experience of a different culture and a different way of life, many people are looking to relocate to Mexico looking for love. Many young adults are moving to Mexico simply looking for a partner to marry and start a family with. I know this is a bit of a controversial topic these days, but the fact of the matter is that it is still very true. You can call them passport bros or gals, but the reality is that many young Americans who have not had any luck in the dating scene in the USA are coming out to Mexico looking for a solution. Some are looking for something specific and are coming to Mexico to find that partner they deserve and have always wanted. As the dating pool in the US these days keeps getting more and more shallow, many people are finding that they have a lot better options out here in Mexico. Some people are simply looking for a partner that is more in line with their own beliefs and they're on the same wavelength. Plus, many other things which unfortunately they just cannot find back home anymore in any capacity. So again, looking for love is a major reason why there's a lot of people that are moving out here to Mexico. Another reason so many people are moving to Mexico is simply because most cities and areas of Mexico are much safer than the USA these days. If one just looks at the numbers topically and goes by what the US State Department says about Mexico, then you will quickly start to believe that the USA is safer than Mexico. Also, if you have watched any kind of news or TV shows in the past 20 plus years, then you are probably already convinced that Mexico is a narco state and that there are tons of bad hombres at every corner ready to kidnap you and take away your social security check. Bruh. But the reality is that this cannot be any more further from the truth. I myself have been living in Mexico for over 6 years, and I have traveled to many areas of Mexico in my time here, and from my experience alone, I can assure you that I feel much safer here in Mexico than I ever did in the USA. For example, while living in the United States, I was always living in fear of what could happen to me. You don't even have to go out of your way these days to find crime and violence in the US. In many cases, it just finds you, no matter who you are or where you are. But in Mexico, you really have to go out of your way as a foreigner to find extreme cases of crime and violence. As long as you practice common sense and situational awareness, things that you should already be well versed in if you come from any major city in the USA, well, then you don't have much to worry about when it comes to being a victim of any kind of crime out here. In fact, most crimes out here in Mexico, they're just crimes of opportunity, such as pickpocketing, stealing unattended items, or items that are left out in the open, or, just simple scams. Again, I am not saying Mexico's perfect and that nothing happens out here. I'm just pointing out the fact that it is much safer to live in Mexico than it is to live in the USA. For example, when we traveled to Jalisco, we were warned repeatedly of the dangers of being in a major city like Guadalajara, the second biggest city in Mexico. While we were there on vacation, the one thing everyone warned us about was to keep our cell phones away from prying eyes and not to be flashy with cash or other valuable items. Simply put, just practice common sense and situational awareness so no one approaches you on a motorbike or on foot and simply snatches your phone out of your hands and runs away with it. We were also warned to be careful in touristy areas and public areas due to people targeting unsuspecting tourists with pickpocketing or some other minor crime of opportunity. And that's it. That is the only warnings we got while we were there. A huge difference from the dangers of walking around downtown LA, Chicago, or Philadelphia, just to name a few cities. We were not told that we would be in any kind of serious danger where our lives would be threatened in any way. In fact, we asked the locals about the crime and violence in Guadalajara, and most of them just said that criminals simply go and rob a liquor store or a 7-Eleven or an OXXO if they need some quick cash, and they will never even think of harassing someone on the streets over a wallet or a phone. We also saw police of all kinds and security of all types just about everywhere we went. So even if there was a crime committed on the streets, the culprit would be caught and brought to justice very quickly. Speaking of police, the ones here in Mexico are nothing like what you would encounter in the USA. Again, a much safer experience out here in Mexico. For example, someone recently told me that he was in a parking lot here in Mexico and a police officer almost hit their car and caused an accident. So, of course, he yelled at the officer, "Hey, watch where you're going!" And the police officer approached him and apologized for not paying attention and for almost causing an accident due to his negligence. With that said, try yelling at a cop in the USA for doing the same thing and see how that's going to go for you. Yeah, you already know what's going to happen. Now, I'm not going to harp too much on this, as we all know how bad policing is in the USA these days, but one thing I want to make clear is that in no circumstance will you ever feel in danger around a Mexican cop, which is not something I can say about, being around a US cop. Again, as I've stated and others have stated before, that the most that a Mexican cop will do to you is that they're going to try to extort you out of a few pesos, which can be easily avoided by demanding a citation for whatever infraction they say you are committing. But back to the safety issue of everyday living here in Mexico. You have to take into account that the people here are also more easygoing, as we said earlier. You're not going to find any kind of cases of road rage or, assault on the street or just any kind of crazy thing like that. Again, for the most part, they are God-fearing folk and they are not looking for any kind of, aggravated assault or to harm others just for the hell of it. There are no such things as mass shootings or terrorist attacks or anything like that. Now, I know some people out there, they might point out cartel violence, but as we've mentioned multiple times in the past in previous episodes, they are not going after nor hurting any civilians, let alone foreigners. The violence committed by cartels is all contained within themselves. Or, again, shootouts with the Mexican military or National Guard, and all of that takes place very far away from any areas you will be visiting. Some of you might be worried about random checkpoints held by Mexicans on certain roads and other areas of Mexico which are off the beaten path. But in reality, for the most part, you should have nothing to worry about. You're going to be traveling on toll roads and roads with, again, a lot of security and a lot of safety. So you're not going to find some random checkpoint, by some random dude on a major toll road. You're only going to find those, again, in the middle of nowhere. If you just keep going and going, deeper into the jungle or the mountains or the forest, then yeah, there's going to be a high chance that you're going to encounter one of these small little toll booths, that are created by the actual civilians, in the area. But as I've said before, most of them, they're just going to wave you by, they're going to let you go, or at the very, very worst, they're just going to ask you to pay some sort of small toll. I would actually be more worried about all the random checkpoints you find on the highways and on city roads in the USA, which are oftentimes only there to create an excuse to have some sort of authority figure illegally pull you over and search your car. Again, in my humble opinion, I find that living in Mexico is much safer than living in the USA these days. With all that being said, living in Mexico will provide you with a much higher quality of life. Not just for you, but also for your entire family. Some of you are extremely worried about the direction public education in the US is headed and are trying to find a solution for your family. Some of you guys already know that even if you want to do something like homeschool your kids, it comes at a very high risk of having the state constantly over your shoulder to make sure, you're doing the right job. Out here in Mexico, you can basically do whatever you think is the best fit for your children and your family. You have a lot more say and choice when it comes to how you want to raise your family and educate your kids. You can educate them as you see fit, not as the state sees fit. which for many people looking to leave the USA, this is music to their ears. Not only can you educate your kids however you want, but you can also rest assured that they will be raised in a safer and better environment than they would be in the United States. It is not just the choice of education for your kids, but it's also a healthier and all-around better environment and quality of life for them. Like, for example, kids actually play outside here in Mexico and have tons of friends and are raised to be responsible individuals. The food they eat is also much healthier as well. They are also taught to have healthier relationships with other kids and adults. They also have tons of access to all kinds of outdoor activities and many parks where they can all play and congregate and create bonds and friendships with each other. Compared to what is going on in the USA these days, Mexico is a much healthier environment all around to raise your kids. I know many people who are financially well off in the United States, and they have uprooted their entire family to move to Mexico just to have a better environment in which to raise their kids in. And I suspect to see even more of that in the future. With all that being said, the dynamics of who is moving to Mexico has changed dramatically over the last few years. Before, it was mainly just a bunch of retirees looking for a more laid-back lifestyle and a place in which their dollars would stretch further and thus getting more bang for their buck out here for their retirement. But in recent years, the people moving to Mexico are of a much younger demographic, and not all of them are looking for just a more affordable cost of living. Some are moving to Mexico looking for love, others are wanting a better environment to raise their kids, and many are simply looking for a way out of the rat race and looking for a higher quality of life, which, spoiler alert, most Mexicans already enjoy. The reality is that things are changing all around the world, and so is the reason why many people are moving to Mexico. It's not just about cheap tacos and margaritas anymore. In fact, many people are more than willing to pay a premium to live in such an amazing country, and in my estimation, will continue to do so in upcoming years. Mexico is not just for affordable living anymore. It is also for better living, period. And well, with all that being said, guys, I want to give a big shout out to all of my members, whether you're a YouTube member, a Patreon member, or again, you support the show in other ways by, just sending a few bucks, buying me a coffee, whatever it is you do out there, I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all your love and support, throughout the years. I want to give a big shout out to all my new subscribers, all my old subscribers, and everyone in between. I also want to give a big shout out to everyone out there in the comment section who's always, again, helping out others by answering their questions or basically sharing info about your life out here in Mexico. Because again, I'm only one resource, but the more people, interact in the comments and help each other out, well, the more information everybody has to make a better decision about moving out here to Mexico. And of course, what we're trying to do here is just to build a community so that we have each other and we can, again, help each other in moving out here, because we already know there's all kinds of people out there in the audience of all kinds of different income levels and different kind of life situations and backgrounds and everything. And so, well, we're here to help each other out. Some of us have more knowledge than others. Some of us have more money than others. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we're here to help each other. And that's, again, part of living in Mexico. With that, people out here, they help each other. It's all about, what you can give, not what you can receive. And so with that said, you already know the deal, guys. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to please like, please subscribe, please share, please hit the bell icon, but more importantly than anything else, please stay awesome. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.